This module is part of the Canadian Injury Prevention curriculum. Audio is required for an enhanced learning experience. Throughout the module, you can access the glossary by clicking the upper left-hand corner in the toolbar above the video and the resources below the video. If at any time you are confused, stuck, or need help, you can click on the upper right-hand corner in the toolbar above the video. Welcome to the Social and Political Context of Injury Prevention Practice module. This module will introduce you to the importance of assessing the social and political context when implementing an evidence-based injury prevention initiative. This module contains a glossary that can be accessed anytime. The glossary contains terms and definitions that will be used throughout the module. If, at any time during the module, you would like to review a term's definition, this glossary can be accessed on the upper left tab in the toolbar above this video on the page where the resources are. The goal for this module is to introduce you to how important it is to understand and consider both the social and political context when implementing an injury prevention program. It may not always be possible to collect the specific information to do this in all cases, but even having a basic understanding of the contextual factors in this case can significantly affect the implementation of your injury programming. What do we mean when we say the social and political context? The social and political context are the current social and political environments that play a role in a community's uptake and adherence to an injury prevention program or initiative. These contexts need to be assessed when injury practitioners are addressing an injury issue. It is important to note that the social and political contexts work together, and assessing them is not a one-time exercise. The social context is the important consideration of a community's perception of an injury problem, the meaning of the problem to a community, families, and/or individuals, the resources that are available to address the problem, and the characteristics of the community that enable or inhibit the prevention of the injury problem. The political context includes factors such as the current political climate, the government's current set of priorities, and whether or not we are in an election cycle. It is the sum of all political issues that exist at the time when injury practitioners are considering to implement an injury policy or guideline. Take a few minutes to describe why you think that the social and political context are important to consider when implementing injury prevention initiatives. Take the time to think of a specific example that you have encountered in your work to apply to this exercise. Let's take a few minutes to think about the social context when addressing an injury problem. The ability to make change happen is impacted by contextual factors that exist as you implement a program or policy change. For example, if a community does not feel that playground injuries are a problem or important, or if there is another issue that has generated a larger profile in a community, a policy change directed at playground injuries would lack in uptake by the community. One way to begin the process of activating change is to draw attention to the magnitude of the problem. This can be done by presenting the burden of injury, or the rates of injury specific to playground injuries, to the community and/or politicians. Reflecting on what you described earlier, and why it is important to consider the social context when implementing an injury prevention program, were you able to think of specific barriers you may face? How would you address these barriers? Now, let's take a few minutes to think about the political context. The political context is arguably the most influential context to consider. You may remember from Lesson 3 of the Canadian Injury Prevention curriculum, or readings from the Canadian Injury Prevention Resource, the 3 E's of injury prevention practice. One of the 3 E's is enforcement. Enforcement of policies and legislation has been cited as one of the most effective interventions in reducing the injury burden. The injury prevention literature shows the implementation and enforcement of laws and regulations can provide far-reaching and long-term benefits in reducing injuries. An enforcement strategy can be implemented at differing levels of government, including the municipal, provincial/territorial, and federal level. Adoption of formal policies by boards and commissions also fall under the umbrella of policy and legislation. The regulation and enforcement of policies and legislation are powerful tools in the prevention of injury. However, policy and legislative solutions must be addressed across the spectrum, or with an ecological approach to injury prevention. Legislation is most effective when used in combination with environmental modification, educational activities, and increasing awareness. Policy change, however, is a complex, multifaceted process. Understanding how to navigate the process is necessary to transfer injury prevention efforts from theory to practice. Some of the key processes that occur can be documented through successful assessment of the political landscape. Throughout this module, you will learn the importance of advocacy and public awareness, having champions to help you gain and maintain momentum, capitalizing on existing public health resources, and identifying policy windows to take action. Injury prevention practitioners interested in policy change must continually assess the social and political landscape for opportunities to make a positive difference in communities. Injury prevention practitioners must consider several factors that will impact the policy decision-making process. These factors include whether injury is seen as an issue, whether there are champions to move the policy change forward, or naysayers that will need to be convinced, the election cycle, and if there's a political will to address the injury issue. By examining these factors, opportunities or policy windows can be identified. There are 4 general steps that advocates must take in order to successfully influence the policy-making process. 1. Understanding government. 2. Determining strategies and tactics. 3. Building relationships. And 4. Appealing to government. Understanding how government works is the first important step in navigating and working within the political context. Each level of government, including the municipal, provincial/territorial, and federal level, has its own processes and procedures to form and pass legislation. There are prescribed processes by which bills become law or funding requests become part of a budget. When seeking to understand government, it is crucial for injury prevention practitioners to be aware of the level of responsibility, the decision-making process, current legislation, regulations and policy, and cycles of government. Likewise, each piece of policy, legislation, or regulation will need to go through a process of agenda setting, policy formulation, decision-making, policy implementation, and ultimately, policy evaluation. Finally, the timing of policy within the cycle of government is important to think about in this process. For example, policies that are contentious are less likely to pass within the 18-month window before an election. Choosing the best strategy or tactic to influence policy is not an ad hoc process, but rather one that involves an in-depth understanding of context and options. Strategy and tactics are generally interrelated. However, they refer to slightly different aspects of a public policy campaign. A strategy is a generalized plan to achieve one's goals, and tactics refer to the methods and actions taken to execute the strategy. In determining your strategy and tactics, you will have to determine certain contextual factors that will influence your approach. These include determining the prevention goal and clarifying the specific request to government, the available resources and limitations, who are your allies and opponents, and whether the campaign is short or long term. Relationships play a critical role in navigating both the political and social context. In order to move the policy-making process forward, relationships are often the key to accessing and leveraging resources and relevant information. Building relationships can take different forms. First, coalition building brings together groups of people around a specific issue or for a defined purpose. It can expand the resources of a given movement and also increase the likelihood of success by ensuring a broad base of support. A broad and diverse coalition of support further demonstrates the relevance of an issue and the impact that policy action will have on multiple sectors and interests. For the most part, coalitions are external to government. Building relationships with decision makers themselves is also an important part of the process. Decision makers are the elected officials or those with influence within government bodies. Decision makers can also facilitate the identification of a champion that has access to the inner workings of government. Building relationships is an important component in navigating the government system and attempting to identify and capitalize on policy windows when they arise. Appealing to government means not only understanding which issues will interest a decision maker at any one time, but also knowing how to frame and communicate an injury problem to make it resonate and align with the decision maker's priorities and philosophy. Sources for this information include official party platforms, involvement of a decision maker in previous causes and events, a keen understanding of a decision maker's own personal biases and personal history, and the issues and concerns within a decision maker's constituency. At the core of appealing to government is also highlighting the return on investment that their involvement and promotion of a policy can garner. Appealing to government also means constructing a narrative or telling a story around the prevention issue that goes beyond the evidence to provide a persuasive, compelling message that necessitates action. For example, tragic incidents can often trigger public concern, demonstrate the human side to the injury issue, and provide a face to the cause. If this concern is effectively channeled, it can produce a rapid and sustained momentum in a political commitment to injury prevention. A hypothetical case study is provided here to reflect on the important information described in this module. Please read the case overview. You will be asked to apply content from the module to answer questions about this case study. You may refer back to this synopsis at any time. A needs assessment is a systematic method of assessing the needs of a population or community and using that assessment to make the necessary changes to meet the community's needs. Conducting a needs assessment is a key part of the process when implementing change. Understanding the social context, for example, the community's perception of an injury problem and the current political climate for change, is a very important part of the needs assessment. What are some of the questions you think would be necessary to ask to understand the needs of the community for this case study? Before answering this question, let's go over what a needs assessment may look like. Here is an example of a needs assessment table. Needs assessments take many forms, and the example provided here is just one of them. For this example, there are 6 steps to complete this table. The first is identifying the purpose of the needs assessment. In answering this question, you would also need to think about identifying a lead or leads for completing this step and the associated time frame. The second step is to identify key players and partners in the regulation or policy you intend to implement. The third step is to identify the needs of the community, the available or accessible resources from the community, and any appropriate evidence that can be used to support the uptake of your policy change. The fourth step includes identifying opportunities that exist to address the needs of the community. And the fifth step is to set priorities and set appropriate criteria to rank the opportunities to address the needs. Finally, the sixth step is to identify the leads and the time frame associated with implementing the policy change and how the evaluation of the change will be documented. Please download this template to work through the case study provided in this module. Take your time to complete the needs assessment table. Think about the type of understandings that you would have to facilitate a change in the community, given case study number 1. There is another model to assist practitioners in thinking about a community's needs. The inquiry model for inquiry and populations of interest highlights 5 guiding questions for practitioners when trying to assess the social and political context. These include: what is the setting/community's perception of the injury problem? What is the meaning of the injury to the community? What is the political climate for preventing this injury and for sustainability? What resources are available to address this injury problem? What are the characteristics of the community that enable or inhibit the prevention of this injury or their readiness for change? These questions can be used to get at the issue of context mentioned in Step 1 of the Needs Assessment Table. What are some strategies that you can think of to begin the process of enacting a community in a change process? Take a few minutes to think about what strategies can be used for case study number 1 to enact an injury prevention policy change. One strategy that is used with success in injury prevention is the use of a champion. A champion is a person within the community, prevention organization, research team, or government body that is engaged in addressing the injury problem. A champion can be used to increase the community's awareness of the injury problem, can promote the uptake of an effective injury prevention initiative, or act as an advocate for moving the policy change process forward. This person can also greatly influence the personalization of the injury problem at the community level. Another strategy used to promote injury prevention practice in a community is the assessment of public health resources. The resources included in this review are related to both human resources and financial resources. To enact change, a community needs to know the capacity at which they can successfully support the change, as well as the monetary needs that are necessary to implement it. This information is gathered in the needs assessment stage, as mentioned in Step 3 of the Needs Assessment Table. Research has demonstrated that when an injury problem has been identified as an important issue by the community, and the community has available or attainable resources to address the issue, changes will result. Assessing the available resources to enact an injury prevention policy change come with both benefits and challenges. Here we provide one example of a challenge that can come from the assessment of available resources. The diverse sectors that an injury prevention issue crosses presents challenges. These include getting everyone on the same page, working towards the same goal, and sharing information. In addition, differing agendas, priorities, and levels of control can sidetrack efforts. However, when aligned, efforts result in a successful solution. Can you think of any specific challenges that may arise in case study number 1? Take a minute to describe what you think could present a challenge in assessing available resources. Another example of a strategy used to enact change is to have the up-to-date research on all aspects of the injury problem, presenting evidence on the burden of injury and on effective prevention initiatives that are published in scientific, peer-reviewed journals can make a significant difference in the ability to mobilize change. This gathering of data would occur in Step 3 of the Needs Assessment. In case study number 1, a 24-year-old man died from a motor vehicle collision at 9 p.m. on December 15, 2009 in Coquitlam, BC. Carl's vehicle was struck by another vehicle operated by a 19-year-old intoxicated driver. 4 similar incidents occurred within a 6-month time frame in Carl's neighborhood. In this case, what are the important data that an injury practitioner should present to policymakers to enact change? Please take a few minutes to brainstorm what you think would be compelling data to present to enact change. To help you along, we have included the first important variable to present to policymakers. Reporting the actual number of fatal collisions that occur in BC specific to this age group and of the conditions involved in the incident would be reported here. In this case, it would be the number of fatal collisions that involved alcohol, drugs, or medications. Check what you have scribed compared to the examples we have presented here. These are the important variables to collect data on to discuss with policymakers. This includes data on the risk factors that contribute to the fatal collisions, data on effective interventions that could be implemented to enact change in this case, and finally, evidence around how to implement and evaluate the effective intervention chosen. Take a few minutes to choose one of these data elements and write down the specific data for that variable. Here are examples of data in each variable that can be presented to policymakers, specific to case number 1. These data can be presented to begin the conversation about a specific policy change to prevent a similar incident in the future. Compare these with your responses. To develop effective strategies to reduce injuries, it is essential for practitioners to consider, address, and work within the existing social and political context. Doing so improves the effectiveness of tools, strategies, and techniques that are required to navigate the policy-making process and to implement laws and regulations that can result in sustained reductions in injury rates. There are various situations, people, timing, processes, and resources that will impact action and the likelihood of success. To be successful in developing and implementing injury prevention programs, practitioners require the knowledge and skills for raising public awareness, building relationships with elected officials, and shaping laws and policies. Below, you will find a few resources if you are interested in learning more about the political and social context of injury prevention practice. There are 2 parts to the evaluation of this module. The first part is intended to assess if you have shifted your understanding of the social and political context. It's comprised of 2 question groups. Each ask how you felt at the start of the module and how you feel now that you have completed the module. The final question of the self-evaluation is an exercise aimed at behavior change. The second part of the evaluation of this module is a feedback form, which helps us to improve the quality of this module and for developing support and interest in additional modules in the future. Please click on the link below to complete the survey.